Today we're working on networking. Welcome to Working On It, the podcast that helps you navigate the trials and tribulations of the modern workplace. I'm Lauren Spearman, brand consultant and advocate for care, transparency and flexibility at work.
And I'm Molly Johnson-Jones, CEO and co-founder of Flexer. Lauren and I are here to provide you with practical advice, insightful discussion and expert guidance on how to thrive in your career.
In this episode, we're going to be diving into a Marmite topic, networking. Love or hate it, we'll be exploring how to build meaningful connections, overcome networking anxiety, and give you some practical tips for success.
Okay, so I feel like you are going to be a big fan of networking.
I feel like it's a real Marmite subject. I feel like you're going to detest it.
It's a necessary evil.
What don't you love about networking?
I think, if we take networking in the sense that everyone thinks of it, which is obviously only part of it.
Yes.
But in the sense of you go to a networking event, you're sitting there, you're talking to people, standing there talking to people. I find that kind of environment very uncomfortable.
Yes. But I think we obviously also both know that networking can be so much more than that.
Yeah.
So much so, Molly, that I've written a list. I think when you hear that networking, that word, it has that connotation of, oh my God, I'm going to go and have to put a sticky badge on with my name and just have these awkward conversations. But I looked at what other ways we network beyond those events. Mm-hmm. So here's my little bullet points. Speaking on panels, joining professional organisations, LinkedIn engagement, mentorship programs, attending webinars or workshops or even hosting them, outreaching cold, joining online forums and communities, attending meetup groups, going for coffee, WhatsApp groups, attending openings or launches, joining a co-working space, freelancing or consulting and cross-department collaboration, because you can network within your own business.
Yeah. So ultimately, it comes back to what is networking, building a network, however you want to do that, whether that's in person, online, at an event, at work, however you want it to be. I think when you think of it in that very broad sense, it's much easier to make it something that you can be good at.
Yes.
Have you ever had some real success when you've been networking?
Yes. So I actually need to tell you a story because I haven't really told anyone this. I was once on a TV show about my confidence because I am naturally an incredibly shy person. Mm-hmm. And I knew that if I didn't become more confident, it would hinder my career because I was
it Naked and Afraid?
It was Naked Attraction. Fully clothed and fearful. But I basically realised that my own shyness was holding me back, and that I don't think you need to be the loudest in the room to have the most impact by any means. But as part of that show, I was hypnotised, and I met a hypnotist, and he it was so amazing.
Live?
No, it wasn't live.
Oh, okay.
It was recorded over a few weeks. But part of the homework, every time I went to see the experts, and then part of the homework I was given was I had to attend a networking event.
Right.
And
before and after being hypnotised, or just after?
No, I was hypnotised after I did that. But yeah, it was raw dog, go in cold, no therapy or anything, just go in, attend an event. And I had built this up in my head. I'd ruined my own day being like, this is going to be awful, this is going to be awful. And then what happened was I met people, ended up making a few connections and then going out until 3 a.m. with them. So I was like, that was okay. And then the next piece of homework was I had to host my own networking event. Yeah. And I just did it where I asked colleagues to just bring an old colleague of theirs. And so there was maybe 10 of us, 12 of us. It was pretty small. But it was almost like a cold water therapy. It's the shock of I forced myself to do something that I felt so uncomfortable with to get over that fear.
I'm really surprised that you were ever really bad at it, because you don't come across like that at all.
That's years of therapy
or
and coaching.
Hypnotism.
Yeah, but it's something I have really worked on. So if anyone ever calls me confident, oh my God, that fear, because not the fear, the joy of actually 11-year-old me that was really shy at school and has grown up like that.
What made you take that step? What was it that made you realise the importance of networking?
I just felt like I got to the point where anything where I would have to talk about myself or work, I would dread. And I was like, maybe I was about 25 and I just thought, I don't want to go through my whole career feeling like this. So I had to do something about it. And in the industry I'm in, I knew that I was probably going to come up against this stuff. So to try and tackle it. So I absolutely get that visceral reaction people have when they talk about networking, because when you are naturally a more introverted person, that doesn't feel comfortable. And yeah, so I do it as much as I can to stop that feeling coming back.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. Like, I also am probably an extroverted introvert, but like, I don't enjoy the kind of networking that you would think of when people talk about it, you know, going to an event, standing there, making conversation with people. And I think generally people feel very uncomfortable. Like, I've very rarely been in networking situations when, you know, you're in a group of people and no one knows each other.
Yes.
And no matter how good someone might be at talking, you can still feel that there is that like awkward pause. Like, there's not the familiarity that you need to be able to have what feels like a natural conversation.
But I think people will sometimes like turn themselves inside out about that feeling, that slight awkwardness.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty normal. Like,
Yeah.
you know, some people you do instantly connect with and you can chat away, and there's others you don't. That's just life.
Yeah.
But I think if you stop participating in anything because of fear of that feeling, it can definitely kind of hold you back. What kind of networking is your preferred choice then?
I think with the traditional sense of networking, like, I have taught myself how to be better at it over time. And actually, I can share some of those strategies that I've used, because in the role that I have, it's unavoidable. Like, I will go to an event as a speaker. You can't just leg it. Like, people expect you to stay around. They want to talk to you. And I think what's interesting is that expectation of people wanting to talk to me and the expectation of what they thought I was going to be would then really get in my head. Because if you're there feeling awkward as well, and everyone expects you to be the most interesting person that they've ever spoken to in their lives, when you're there like holding a glass of wine like, shit, this is uncomfortable. I was like, I have to get out of my own head and I have to teach myself how to feel comfortable. So the first one is that I very rarely go to networking events where I'm not a panelist or a speaker. I do find it much easier, and I am in that fortunate position to be able to do that. But I find it much easier to public speak in front of like literally thousands of people than go to a networking event where I don't know anybody, which a lot of people find very strange. But I find that when you've been on a panel or when you've spoken about something, people come to you and ask questions, and then there's like a natural rapport between that.
I am always so impressed with the people that ask the questions, that come up to you and ask the questions, because I don't have that confidence to do that. And I always think, even if someone just wants to say hello, I'm like, that's such a like
brave
thing. Because we should.
I think it's quite brave.
Yeah, but it's it says a lot about someone that they've got the confidence to do that. I think it's great.
And I think another thing that was really, really beneficial is when I first started going to networking events, like, you know, I did the classic internships and the grad schemes and everything, where networking is very important. And I remember kind of watching people around me who were exceptional, even at, you know, like 18, 19, 20, like amazing to be that good at networking that young. Also to have that level of confidence to be able to go up to somebody who's incredibly successful in their career and ask loads of questions. But I started to remember the kinds of questions that were asked. So now in my brain, in those situations, I have 5 or 10 questions that I know are, sounds very odd, but like normal things to ask people in those situations. So then it means you don't panic and end up in your own head and go, God, what do I say?
I think some of the best people that I've observed as being really good conversationalists are, because, you know, and especially if it's work related, there's often like, what do you do? Tell me about your job, blah, blah, blah. But the people that kind of offer up something that is on their mind, or like, this is what I'm working on at the moment, or this is my challenge. And just that openness, I think, is such a wonderful icebreaker.
Yeah.
And can help you kind of connect with someone.
One of the most important things in networking is the ability to ask questions. I think people really underrate that and don't appreciate how important a skill that is, even in a human. Like, if you think about, if you go to a dinner party and you sit next to somebody that doesn't ask any questions, I'm sure I've definitely had plenty of those experiences where you're sitting there and you're like, you haven't asked a single question. Like, how can you keep conversation going? Like, it's just a normal human thing.
I was at an event this week and a woman came up to me. We have a mutual friend, and she was like, oh, we met at so-and-so's birthday dinner. And I was in such a terrible like headspace that day. I was in a really bad mood, and I was like, I'm so sorry. I was like, I was just such a shit dinner party guest that day.
So you were that person that didn't ask any questions?
I just couldn't get out of my own head. It was horrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. There are, you know, that's a tough crowd when it feels quite one way.
So learning how to ask those questions. And then I think the third thing that really, really helped me was almost finding somebody that you know, going to events with, who is good at networking. Because I think when you're with somebody else who is good at keeping that conversation, good at meeting people, good at offering up that kind of like rapport and information, just by immersion, you start to feel more comfortable and the anxiety around it goes away. So I definitely found that, like, there are a couple of my friends that are very, very good in those situations. And I found that being with them and going to events with them, not sticking to them like glue, like the awkward friend in the corner, but just seeing somebody do it well was really helpful.
And just observing it, because I think if you've never been to an event like that, it can sound bigger than it is.
Yeah, exactly.
To just to get that experience.
You obviously listed all of the things that you think networking is, and we've covered the big one of like going to an event, meeting people. But there's been a huge rise since the pandemic, I guess, of online networking. And apparently, although I am suspicious of the stat, about 87% of roles have been filled with some form of networking involved. And I know that you mentioned that has been very important to you. Like, how have you used online networking to your advantage?
I've definitely used it to help me get jobs.
Yeah.
So I saw a company that I wanted to work for that didn't necessarily have any jobs going, but I noticed I was connected to someone on Twitter. This is before it became X, years ago.
Yeah.
And this is like 20
on Twitter,
20
so niche.
End of 2015. Don't judge me too much. I'm not on it now. And I noticed that someone that I followed worked at the company I wanted to work for. So I reached out to her. I DM'd her on Twitter and said, I'm really interested in the company you work for, and I'd love to know a bit more about the role that you do. And she was like, this is what my role consists of. And then 6 weeks later, she came back and she's like, oh, if you're looking, we are hiring. And so it didn't get me the role, but it got me a connection to her to find out about when they were hiring.
Yeah, that's really
And then
useful.
I went through the interview process. And then another example of networking and how that's kind of helped me secure a job. When I was ready to leave the role that I was in, I started looking at where I wanted to work next. So I was working for a makeup brand. I wanted to join a furniture brand. So I went through LinkedIn, found out people that worked at the brand, and I basically asked if I could pitch to them a collaboration idea.
Nice.
And I pitched to them a collection of like furniture that was like dressing room related. So like mirrors, drawers, like beauty related stuff to get me a connection. And then when they were hiring, I used the fact that I had come in and presented. So I used the people were in my network as a kind of rationale of like why I was a good candidate or why I was interested.
I think that's a really smart example of networking online. I think there is, or at least I see it a lot on LinkedIn. There's like some expectation sometimes that just reaching out and asking somebody for a virtual coffee is enough.
Yeah.
It's really not.
I'm sure you do too. I get a lot of requests for people to go for coffee. And if I had the time, I would love to, but
I wouldn't.
I just don't have the time. I love a chat. Do you know why? Because I'm really good one-on-one. I'm pretty shit in a group. Yeah. I'm not the best. Like I'm not the best at like, holding a room, but I'm all right one-on-one. But it's kind of like selfishly, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
I think there has to be that. I think there has to be something there.
Yeah.
For to want to give up your time.
Yeah. Which is why pitching that idea was such a smart way of approaching it. And I think it's exactly, if you want to meet somebody, particularly if you are networking up, which obviously is a lot of people's intention, you don't network down very often. Generally, you're trying to network up to get yourself a certain position or get yourself a certain connection. Those are often going to be some of the busier people that will not be able to say, hey, yes, let's just go for a virtual coffee. I've got loads of time.
Yeah.
So you need to help yourself to stand out from probably the dozens of people that are doing that every week, but also consider it a value exchange. Like if they are helping you in some way, which is what you're trying to angle at by networking in those scenarios, you need to think what you can offer them. Yeah.
Even in its simplest form, before you even get to kind of asking for a coffee, if you're on something like LinkedIn, even engaging with posts is helping to,
so that your name's familiar.
Yes. Yeah. And you'll see it a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of people that you may not know directly, but you know of them through commentary, or you might see their content and comment. And I think then that you build a bit of a rapport with someone that, you know, if you then know what they do, or you end up eventually talking to them, or someone's looking for someone for a certain role, they might spring to mind without you even having met them.
Yeah,
which I
that's
think
very
is,
true. Visibility, I think, is key.
We probably need to be cautious not to make it sound too transactional, right? Because actually sometimes it is networking just to meet other people in your industry. Sometimes it is just to, develop even friendships within the industry. I think it doesn't have to always be with a what can you do for me.
But I don't think that's done enough. And that was sort of why I talked about the value exchange. It's like I very rarely would see somebody go to someone and be like, oh, let's just connect over this or have a conversation around this.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we generally do see networking as transactional, whereas really it's probably, and again, that's a big assumption, I do not have any statistics to back this up, most networks become useful over time rather than it being like, I made this connection, something happened and I got what I wanted.
Yes.
It's more that you build a network over time that you can then eventually call on somebody or they can call on you and you've built that relationship, sort of like paying it forward.
Yes. I think a bit, Molly, about those loose connections. So I learned something recently called the weak tie theory. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay, so let me fill you in. So this is a theory that was first introduced by an American psychologist called Mark Granovetter in 1973 in a research paper where he argued that obviously strong ties like your family and friends is incredibly important, but weak ties, so more kind of distant and casual relationships, are more value in terms of providing access to new information and opportunities. And then I started reading into this a little bit more, and it was kind of saying weak ties are composed of people who are less like us and have access to different social circles and networks. As a result, they're more likely to be sources of novel and diverse information, which can be especially valuable for individuals looking for a new job. And I've got the perfect example of this week. I went for lunch with some people who we actually know each other through TikTok and then through LinkedIn. And actually the connection, we do very different jobs, but actually that could be beneficial for both of us because we do different jobs, we can be referrals for each other.
You're not competitive to each other as well.
And I really like this notion of actually, yes, I can surround myself with people that do exactly what I do, but we're probably having the same challenges and the same trials, and actually going outside of that circle is such an opportunity to learn more. I think it's I love that notion. I love I kind of heard, was reading up about it. I was like, this sounds great, and it makes total sense.
It's also important for society from that respect as well. Like otherwise everybody lives within their own bubbles and they perpetuate their own narratives, and then everyone ends up holding the same beliefs.
Yes, no one should want to live in an echo chamber. I think that's pretty damaging. But I really like that notion, and actually something I introduced firstly to myself, and then to when a team that I managed a few years ago, was I got into a habit of reaching out and meeting with people that did the same job as me somewhere else. And the weak tie is it was always different industries, because I always believed that in-house, if I, as an in-house marketer, it would benefit me to be constantly learning from elsewhere. And I purposely picked people that worked in very different industries because even though we did the same job, I knew that they would probably be able to bring something to me that I wouldn't know, and equally, hopefully, I would do the same. And then the team that I managed at the time, I would encourage them to do the same. Like if you see someone that is doing something you thought could be interesting, reach out to them, go for coffee, see if you can have a chat. What are the challenges they're facing? Where are they winning? How could we take that into what we're doing? And it's absolutely not competitive at all. You're both helping each other.
And that's another example of networking without necessarily having something to gain. And I think that another great example of it, there's not a value exchange. Or maybe there is, but you don't go into it thinking that you're going to gain something. Yeah,
and I'm actually part of a marketing community where it is they just bring people together for events. Sometimes they're more formal events with around a theme or a topic, but sometimes they are just a social activity just to spend time with people that may just be great connections.
And that's another example of like low pressure networking. So I think the reason that networking is like Marmite and it's sort of love it or hate it is because what we picture as networking is this very high pressure, very social, very intense event. Whereas actually there are plenty of examples of much lower pressure networking. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Like I remember being told early in my career that networking is one of the most important things that you can do. And I found that really alienating because I was like, that's not going to be something that I'm ever going to be exceptional at. I can do it, I can get through it. But being told that that was so important to me in my career, I found quite intimidating and alienating.
But is that because of your perception of what you thought networking was? Yeah.
Exactly. It's what I thought networking was. So I think it's better to reframe it and to think of it more broadly. And in your menu list of 10 ways of networking, you know, I'm sure that there are 2 or 3 there that are very palatable to people.
Yeah, and it's developing connections or building relationships. I think it's the networking word just drums up this feeling or connotation of something a bit more formal, which it absolutely doesn't need to be. Molly, you spoke earlier about advice that you've been given and questions to ask in a networking scenario if it is a bit more formal event. I want to pick your brains on that, but first let's go to an ad break. Fed up with being catfished? I'm not talking about your love life. I'm talking about being catfished at work. Showing up expecting an amazing culture, great vibes, and instead finding microwave fish and micromanagers. But how can you really tell what it's like to work somewhere before you show up on day one? The work index is like having a friend on the inside, giving you all the info you need about a company before you accept an offer or spend hours and hours applying. There are 20,000 companies on the work index with info on culture, benefits, promotion, progression, and management style. Go check it out now at theindex.work. Molly, in your networking watch and learn early in your career, what kind of questions did you notice were coming up a lot and people were positively responding to?
So I think there are kind of 2 banks of questions. The first one is there are the obvious professional ones to ask, which I think are really helpful when you're a bit earlier in your career. You're less able to build rapport with somebody that's much, much more senior. Like you're not going to ask somebody who's 30 years older than you, you know, where they're going on holiday or what their favourite food is.
That sounds like a shit date.
It does, doesn't it? But asking about, you know, why they were drawn to that company, if it's like a company networking event,
Nice.
what made them want to do the career that they're doing, what they'd love to be doing more of or less of in their role. Like trying to ask interesting questions about professional subjects, I think, is a really, really good way to break that down.
And also leading questions like that when you're asking questions that feel very yes-no.
Oh, then it's quite stilted.
It does feel so transactional, whereas questions like that, it opens up the floor for more discussion as well.
Yeah. And then I think remembering, particularly if it's less of like a networking upward scenario, you're just in a group event. I think people often think that conversation and questions has to stick to the topic of the event or the topic of work. It doesn't really. Like you can be at an event and you can end up talking about your dog or about a terrible date you went on or about your favourite wine. Like there are loads of different things that you can talk about, and you notice the people that are comfortable with that.
Yep.
And they gravitate towards each other, and you notice the people that are very uncomfortable with that. And they're like, no, this is work, and I'm only going to ask about work and only be asked about work.
Yes. It's interesting you say that. So I co-hosted a networking event a couple of weeks ago. And firstly, I spent the whole day in an absolute state of panic of like, well, this is going to be awful and no one's going to enjoy themselves. Obviously, it's a load of bollocks and I just ruined my own day. But, and the event itself was, we had about 60 people that work in marketing, and it was really, of course I came away from it feeling amazing, but actually in that process, I was like, are people going to find anything to speak about? And of course that wasn't the case. And how we kind of ran the event, it was focused on talking about mentoring within the marketing community. And then we did this like mini like speed dating network thing, rather than just go and talk to someone for 5 minutes, which I think can feel quite uncomfortable. Everyone was given a question. Yeah. So then there's something to focus on.
That's nice.
And inevitably, and I kind of sat in on some of the conversations and stuff, and inevitably like everyone just goes off on a tangent, and it's brilliant because I think it gives you a structure and something to start with, but most people will find that conversation will naturally flow.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to take the pressure off yourself, because you're not going to get on with everybody. There are very few people in the world that can get on with everybody, and you will naturally find I am definitely not one of those people. But I think people expect in networking events to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You're naturally going to gravitate towards people that you get on with.
Absolutely.
And you're going to want to spend time with those people at networking events. And if you do end up in a really awkward conversation where you're stuck and you're trying to run away for 20 minutes, that's not a reflection on you being bad at networking. That's just a situation where 2 people met that didn't get on brilliantly.
Yeah. I also think as well that when you're going to those events, so many people will be in that same position as you. It's very rare that you will ever walk into a networking event and everyone's like, oh my God, I feel like full of confidence. I absolutely love this. Oh my God, can't wait. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think knowing that uncomfortableness comes with just doing something new or, just not knowing anyone, that's a normal feeling.
Yeah.
But the only way is through.
Yeah.
Push
you just
yourself
have
past
to get
it.
used to it. Take yourself out of your comfort zone. You'll find the right way to do it. We were having a conversation earlier about how networking is sort of like a spectrum of calculatedness, I think. There are some people who are quite natural networkers. They meet people, they get on, they connect on LinkedIn, they engage occasionally, and then eventually maybe something comes of that relationship.
Yeah.
But there are other people that will have like spreadsheets of all the people that they met, what their interests were, when they last contacted them. Where do you think you sit on that spectrum of very...
wow, spreadsheets. That really brings back to my sales days where I had use Salesforce, track every conversation I had and stuff, and it was all that's
the
just
name of their children.
It's like when's their birthday, what football team do they support, and all this stuff. I wish I was that person because I think that sounds great. Yeah, how wonderful.
No,
but what for me, I see no necessarily point in it. I just think that I'd just love to be that organised. I think I'm maybe midway.
Yeah.
I'm actually a terrible communicator. I'm a good networker, but I'm a terrible communicator. You'll see this and you WhatsApp
in
me
terms
about
of
3 weeks later.
messages. Yeah.
And so I think I know that I'm better in person than I am communicating over anything else. But yeah, I think my connections are. Yeah, it's not like I think I better get in touch with that person just for the sake of getting in touch.
Yeah. I do know some people who are brilliant at it, where they will be like, yes, every 3 months or every 6 months
almost
or whatever.
A reminder.
Like a reminder, like in a spreadsheet. And I think when people's careers are built on networking, obviously it's very important to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
But again, as we kind of said earlier, often networking is said as like one of the most important things that you'll do in your career. I think it depends on your career. I think it depends on your stage of life, what you're focusing on as well. Like me building a business, although networking is important in some situations, do I have time to dedicate building a network that may or may not be useful to me in the future? Absolutely not. Might I in 10 years? Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, so I think it's that pressure of always being told, oh, this thing's really important, you need to dedicate time to it. You don't always have to.
No, and actually I was speaking to someone the other day and she was asking for recommendations for a guest for something she was recording, and I was like, this guy would be perfect. And she was like, he's absolutely hard no, because I've tried before, and he's like, no, I'm focusing on my business. And it's not because, he's not, not friendly or anything. It's like, that's his priority. And I was like, hats off to him for knowing what's a priority. Yeah. Whereas I'm finding at the moment, since I've gone self-employed, all of my work has come through my network.
So you have to dedicate time to it.
So much of my time. And actually, one thing I have really noticed is if I was working 5 days a week, I would be then doing networking on top. So I try to limit myself to 4 days a week. And then the other day is just essentially it's unpaid work because I'm still doing lots of things to bring in the next. It's like biz dev, like constantly building that pipeline to potentially see where that goes, and if any work comes from it. The network can look different from. Could be bosses, it could be peers, it could be people that have seen content online. It's a real spectrum, which I think is really interesting.
When you think about using your network or building a network to get work, like I'm sure there'll be lots of freelancers listening, like what are your maybe like top 3 pieces of advice for making those connections and getting that work?
My number one tip would be get active on something like a LinkedIn. So, and I don't mean post if you're not comfortable yet with posting, but just commenting. I think we touched on it earlier. I think there is so much power in just being contributing to the conversation, like having an opinion. I think that's a really initial first step. I think if there are any online events or events that if you feel comfortable attending in person that you can attend that are around the topic of what you do, I think you'll inevitably build some connections that way.
Yeah.
And this probably should have been my biggest tip is reach out to people you already have worked with.
Yeah.
And speak to them and say, and let them know you're available or this is what you do.
Yeah.
Even like last week, I was speaking to an old boss and he was like, oh, if is there anything I can do for you? Like, do you want me to share your details? I've got like a WhatsApp group with loads of senior people. Would that be helpful?
Nice.
And that's, again, just from having conversations casually with people that I've worked with previously. So make the most of your colleagues that you've worked with previously, start contributing to conversations online, and then see if there's any community specifically to your industry that you could join. I think would be really helpful.
That's really useful advice.
Molly, we thought we were done with workplace icks, but actually we were just discussing off camera the concept of work the room.
Oh no.
When I hear that, I think of, when a cow's udders are being milked.
What? Why?
I don't know. Like work. I don't know. There's like
work the udder. Oh.
Every time I hear it, work it. Like
work it. There's something really.
Did you see my hand motion there? That's one for anyone watching on YouTube.
Yeah. Well,
anyway, what are your thoughts on work in the room?
Not to do with milking.
When you don't hear cow's udders and you think, oh, I've got to speak to everyone, I think that puts so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you went to an event and came away with one meaningful connection, I think that's fabulous.
I think also that's often much more useful than somebody that's gone and spoken to 100 different people and just for a minute.
Yeah.
And you do see examples of those people at networking events. They're quite obvious. They're the people that is like always standing, hovering next to an important person, and then they're like trying to get in, and then 2 minutes later they're doing it again. And they always seem to be armed with these like talking points and what they want to get out of it. And I find that I wonder if it's easier to spot when you are the target of those people or when you're watching it from afar.
I kind of want to be that person though, because if you've got a bit of an agenda,
the
or
person
something,
working the room.
no, but if you've spotted someone that you want to speak to and you want to get your talking points in,
yeah, that makes sense. But the people that do that with like everyone at a networking event, like really that pressure of like meeting everybody, trying to make all these connections, trying to get the most bang for your buck,
like speed networking.
Yeah,
yeah,
and you really do see it. It is an ick. Those people are an ick.
I spoke to a woman recently. I will not reveal her name, but if she's listening, she'll know. And she was telling me how she has made quite a good networking connection through a dating app. So she uses it almost like as like biz development. And yeah, she was like, it's just great. Like if I meet someone within the industry, I'll just match just to even have a conversation. Even if it doesn't go anywhere, I might make a connection. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Because I've heard of like, like Bumble for Business, or like, so a friend of mine, he will like want to meet people for the sake of meeting people in that sort of like building a connection sort of way, and use apps for that. And that for me, like for some reason that gives me like a visceral reaction of like, ugh.
That question when someone's like, oh, what's your favourite position? And then the answer is CEO.
Yeah.
But it's like, it reminds me of that. It's like using someone not for their body or mind, but just for their like job title.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's a very unusual way of approaching it. And like he's made some brilliant connections. It's really, really helped him in the future. But for me, that would be a very uncomfortable way of like going about networking. The dating thing, I mean, arguably, if it happened organically, as in you went on a date with somebody because you wanted to go on a date with somebody, actually you realise you weren't compatible, but
yes,
you stayed in contact. That seems much more palatable and more normal to me. Matching with people because you think they could be useful in a business context on a dating app, that's quite an ulterior motive. Like I'm sure the other person doesn't expect that.
Oh yeah, it just feels quite calculated. Although I do think there are definitely links between networking and dating anyway. Like one of my biggest observations is people that DM me on LinkedIn and just like go in hard with a hard sell straight away. And I'm like, no, it's like you need the foreplay of like conversation to get started, see if there is like anything that is interesting. Like someone messaged me this week and was like, and I thought, well, this could be an interesting connection. Went straight in with a, do you want to invest in my business? I was just like, you could have taken a few weeks even to like get to know each other, like get to know my content. And you would have very quickly seen that I am not an investor. But it just felt like you need to warm up to people. You don't just go in.
I don't know. I'm not a fan of business foreplay.
I like to enjoy the process, not just...
Because you know when someone connects with you on LinkedIn that they probably do want something. And so then when somebody slides into your DMs and is like, hey, really great to connect with you. I'd love to share our thoughts on X topic. I'm like, what do you really want? I'd far rather someone was just like, boom, invest in my business, and I'll go, no.
Oh, no, I'd rather play the game.
Fair play. So you like the business foreplay. I do not like the business foreplay.
Business or not, just foreplay. Molly, I think the biggest takeaway from this is networking doesn't have to be walking into a room and having a glass of warm Prosecco. There is so many other ways to network and build connections. And actually building connections is such an important part of our careers.
Hugely important, but I think we have to take the pressure off of ourselves and make networking work for us, and to find a way of networking that you find comfortable.
Yeah, totally agree. That's it for this week. Next week, we are talking about fuck-ups at work.
And how to deal with mistakes.
Might be a long episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.